Oh, am I live? Let me just make sure that I'm live first because I wasn't live before. So now I'm live. So let me just go live on Instagram and then we can get started. Thank goodness for that because I've been having some technical issues. Right, so I'm live on Instagram as well now. So, hi everyone. Good morning. On this Friday bank holiday weekend. So, for those of you that don't know me, my name is June Allen, and I am the founder of the Art of Greatness at juneallen.net. I'm a racial trauma therapist, I am a business coach, and what else am I? I'm a retreat facilitator. And I love what I do. I love what I do. So today we are continuing our conversation around anger. Okay, so a couple of days ago, I did a live stream about unmasking the angry black woman. Okay, what does that mean? What does that look like? And I talked about four different types of anger. Okay, so I talked about behavioral anger, inherited anger, fear-based anger, and displaced anger. So if you haven't seen the haven't seen that one, then I would go back through my videos and watch that. If you're watching on Facebook, okay, you have to bear in mind that there were some technical issues. I wasn't able to. It didn't record basically, so it was just a nightmare. But it's on Instagram. So if you go over to my Instagram page, my username is at Yard of Greatness. You can watch part one over there, and I'm trying to find a way to download it so that I can upload it and put it on my website. And actually put it on my in my YouTube as well. Hi Rose, hi Lydia, thanks for joining. Watch part one if you haven't seen it already. So now I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to give you six more. Okay, six more types of anger for you to think about. So yeah, I've had some really great feedback actually from part one. I don't think people really recognized and really understood how complex anger is and how important it is for us to be able to really unpack what anger means for us, the impact that it has on our well-being, and the different types of anger, how it shows up. And this is important. Like I was saying on Wednesday when I did the other live stream, it's important because you need to be able to, because anger is such a complex thing for us as Black women, living under different systems of oppression, that don't want us to experience our anger. So actually being able to understand your anger and being able to respect it is an important part of your well-being. Okay, so just a little bit of housekeeping before we get into it. So if there's anything that I say today that you find useful or that you want to find out any more details about what I do, how you can work with me one-on-one, or my wellness mastermind that I do on a monthly basis, you can click the link in my bio, go to heal.juneallen.net. That's heal.juneallen.net. That's heal.juneallen.net. If you've got any questions or anything, about as I'm sharing, please feel free to drop them in the comments, and I'm more than happy to address them. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can always send me a DM, and I'm happy to answer any questions there. Okay. The last thing that I'll say is that to remember that social media is not therapy. Okay. Social media is not therapy. So if you want to go deeper with this work, then you need to book a session with me, whether it's one-on-one or join the mastermind so that we can really get into the group therapy and all the rest of it. All right. So that's me. Right. So let's get into the content. So number one, okay, I'm going to give you six other. Wednesday I did four, and today I'm going to give you another six different types of anger. Okay, so we've got 10 in total. So the first one is retaliatory anger. Okay, retaliation anger. That basically means if somebody does something to you, you're going to go and do something back to them. And a lot of times, as black people, we don't always do that. We don't always do that because again, it's unsafe for us to be able to express our anger. A lot of times we swallow it. We don't always act out, or sometimes we might show our retaliation through somebody else. Like I spoke about on Wednesday about display how anger can get displaced on other people. So it might come out as you retaliating against somebody else rather than actually retaliating against the system or somebody else that has done something to you. It ends up getting played out in your other relationships. But a lot of times, I would say that one of the ways that retaliation anger does play out, actually, when we think about gang culture, and people get murdered. One person gets murdered, so the other side gets upset, and then they want to go back and murder somebody in their gang, and it just creates more anger and resentment and upset and chaos. Okay, when you're thinking about revenge and stuff like that, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And so it tends to escalate the anger, especially if it's, yeah, if it's in personal relationships, or whether it's in friendships or whatever. That stuff doesn't work. So really think about that. It makes more sense when if you've been hurt by somebody, if you're feeling angry about something, to actually try to address it with them directly, or if that person doesn't have the listening for it, then seek support. Go somewhere that can hear you, because you don't always need to be seen and heard by that person, be understood by the person that hurt you, in order for you to get a resolution for it, or for you to get help. Because I think sometimes that just causes more suffering. It causes more suffering. I think a lot of times we can sit around waiting for the person that hurt us to apologize, to get some sense in their head and go, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't have done this. Not everybody's willing, not everybody wants to do that. Not everybody can do that, because they don't have the tools themselves in order to deal with whatever comes up for them. They don't know how to have relationships. And so, they don't want to engage in conversation about how they hurt you and stuff like that. And sometimes that can create a cycle for us of codependency and suffering, thinking that we have to have that particular person show up for us and apologize and make amends and do all the repair work, when they just ain't got the tools for it. They just can't do it. So think about that in terms of, if you're feeling like you want to retaliate against someone, ultimately you're only going to end up hurting yourself. So the kindest thing that you can do for yourself, if you're in a situation where you're being harmed by somebody else, okay, and they're not willing to take responsibility for it, or do any repair work or make amends, then you need to find a space where you can process it and deal with it, so that you can move on. Because otherwise, you're gonna end up, end up in a continuous cycle of suffering, and it's just not, the time and the bandwidth and the exhaustion it takes to hold all of that together is just, it's just a lot for you to do. So think about that. All right, so that's number one, retaliation anger. Number two, which is a huge one for us, which is anger that's a mask. Okay, anger that's a mask. Quite often, anger that we feel is a mask for unexpressed emotion. Okay, oftentimes the anger that we feel is a mask for unexpressed emotion. Okay, emotions that, some of those emotions might be old. They might have happened years ago. It could be intergenerational. That stuff that we don't know, like the specific details, but that's been passed down. I did talk about intergenerational anger as well in the previous video. But yeah, anger can mask a lot, and I think sometimes anger can, you can mask shame. It can mask grief. Okay, it can mask fear. So sometimes if you're feeling angry about stuff, ask yourself those questions. What's underneath the anger? Why are you angry? Is it because you're scared of something? Is it because you're scared of something? Is it because you feel ashamed of something? And so being visible by people, feeling visible in crowds or whatever, or in certain situations that make you feel vulnerable, it triggers the anger, because the anger is trying to protect you from the emotional harm that the shame brings up. Yeah, so think about that. Think about what's underneath it. The other thing that I would say about anger, being a mask as well, is really thinking about, what goes on in the news and stuff as well. You think all the time we're seeing all of this stuff in the news. This is another person got, I can't remember the brother's name. But I saw a recent article, about a black guy. He had his own mental health challenges. And he was murdered on a track. He was murdered by a white guy on a train. And it's just like, we're just expected to see these things and hear these things, and it not to affect us. But a lot of times that, that's going to show up as anger, the injustice of it. Okay, the grief. Because these things are happening all the time. These things are happening on a daily basis. There's something happening. There's something happening on a daily basis. Somebody being murdered. Somebody's being abused. And we see all this stuff in the news, and we're just supposed to, it's going to impact us. It's going to impact us. So that that mask, that anger is masking all of the powerlessness and all of the grief and all of all of the stuff that's happening to us on a daily basis around this stuff that we often sometimes don't even know where to take it. So the anger is basically it's a way of trying to protect you. It's telling you that something's wrong, that something's upsetting you, and that you need to protect yourself. That's what the anger is doing. It's a form of self protection. It's a form of self protection. So I think, even in having these conversations around anger and really being honest with yourself, starting to be honest with yourself about the impact that all of these different types of anger might have. This is where, when I was talking on Wednesday about it being the seed to your liberation, this is kind of what I'm talking about. Because when you start to understand that, what I'm looking at on the news is causing all of this, then you have to put boundaries in. I'm not saying that you don't inform yourself about stuff that's happening, because obviously you need to have a certain level of awareness around what's happening in the news. But how much news do you watch? And with all the, who do you follow on social media? That do you follow accounts on social media that are constantly churning out negative news? Constantly churning out anti-blackness, all of that kind of stuff. It might be that you have boundaries around it where you say to yourself, okay, well, I'm just going to give myself 10 minutes a day just to check in and see what's happening on the news. Maybe I'm going to go on my social media accounts and unfollow people. I'm going to unfollow people that are constantly churning out black trauma. That's not good for my mental health. And it's creating, this building up a situation where you're constantly angry all the time because there's one thing after one trauma after another, with us and in our community. So think about that. Think about again, what's underneath your anger. What emotions are you masking? What are you suppressing? What are you holding on to? What is it that you feel that you can't say or express? And how is that, how is that kind of feeding your anger, your suppressed anger? And it's not healthy to hold on to it. It's important for you to have a safe space to be able to talk about this stuff. So whether it's your therapist or whether it's a trusted friend, or maybe you've got a spiritual advisor, or maybe you've got you're in group therapy, or maybe you're in recovery, you've got recovery buddies as well. You need to talk to your people. You need to talk to your tribe about this stuff, because if you're holding all of that stuff in, it's not good for your well-being. And like I said on Wednesday about the displacement, it's gonna, you'll end up hurting yourself. Okay, you internalize in the anger and you'll end up hurting yourself, or you'll end up hurting somebody else because you're gonna put it on somebody, you're gonna displace it on somebody else. So a healthy relationship with your anger means finding a safe space to be able to process it, and talk about it. Yeah, so that's anger as a mask. Okay, so the next one is self-harm. It's kind of related to what I was just saying. So self-harm is when the anger is turned inwards. Okay, it's suppressed and it's turned inwards, and it becomes self-abuse. So this can show up as you know, what do you call it? It can show up in addictive behavior, compulsive addictive behavior. So it can, if you're doing drugs, if you're drinking a lot, if you are abusing food, if you are abusing the gym, there are so many different ways that self abuse can show up. Negative self-talk is another one. Just talking to yourself, talking down to yourself quite a lot. These are all, and also there's the cutting and stuff as well, the actual physical harm. There's so many different ways that self-harm shows up, but this is another way of anger trying to find its way out, and it can't. For whatever reason, you feel like you can't talk about what's going on for you. You can't talk about your anger. So then what ends up happening is you end up blaming yourself again. You internalizing it, and then your anger is trying to find a way out. So that's how it shows up. That's how it shows up. Through food or whatever. Spending is another way that it shows up as well. In the group yesterday, in the financial therapy session yesterday, the whole concept of overspending and compulsive spending, all of that kind of stuff came up quite a few times in the sessions. And it came from a lot of time. It came from a place of pain. When people get stressed, people get upset. They reach for the credit card or whatever. Some people, they reach for food. And they end up abusing food. So when you think about what are the ways that you act out or act in, There's acting out and acting in. You can indulge, overindulge, or you can withdraw and deprive yourself of things. That's another form of self harm when you're depriving yourself of certain things. I'm probably more on the deprivation spectrum when you're talking about food. When I get stressed and stuff like that, I tend to eat a lot less. The anxiety and stuff makes me eat less. But then sometimes I have moments where I can overeat. But it depends on what it is. It depends on why I'm stressed. I think it depends on how I act out or act in. So yeah, when I get in those situations, I know that, or if I'm feeling like I want to act out and behave in those ways, then I know that I need to talk to my therapist. I need to go to a recovery meeting. I need to talk to my trusted friends. I need to do all of that stuff to help me process it, because one of the things that came up in this session yesterday was, if you just kind of focus on the actual thing that you're using to self-soothe, i.e. whether it's money or food or what, if you focus on the food or focus on the money with your overspending and all the rest of it, you're never going to be able to stop that behavior if you're just focusing on the money. You have to look at what's underneath. You got to look at the emotional stuff that's underneath. Why are you doing that? Who are the people, places, or things that are triggering the self-harm? Are there certain people that make you feel a certain type of way, that make you that trigger the low self-esteem, that trigger the self-hatred, and then there you go, off to overeat, or to harm yourself, or do whatever it is. Once you have an awareness around the people, places, or things that trigger that stuff, and then what your acting out patterns are, or acting in patterns, then that's when you can really start to make change. So it really comes back to self-awareness. It comes back to really understanding yourself and getting to know yourself, and building a relationship with yourself, so you begin to understand what your anger is trying to tell you, what the behavior is trying to tell you. Okay? So that's self-harm. The next one is passive aggression. So yeah, I mean, passive aggression, I'm laughing because I know that I can be really passive aggressive is like an avoidant type of anger. Okay, it's an avoidant type of anger. So it might be, again, something that you don't feel safe expressing, and also as a people, because a lot of times we've not been allowed to express our anger, so it literally comes out sideways. It's particularly if you were raised in a home as well where there was violence perpetuated towards you, but you weren't allowed to say anything about that violence. Our parents, I know a lot of us will relate to me saying that, parents used to say, stop crying, I'll give you something to cry about. So the upset mixed with the anger, maybe that, especially if there was violence, it's like, not only were you not allowed to you weren't allowed to be angry about what was being done to you, but then you had to also, like, suppress your upset, you suppress your own anger about the mistreatment, about the violence that you've experienced. So that always comes out sideways. That comes out sideways. To be holding all of that, holding all of your anger, is a recipe for suffering. And it will impact your mental health. It will impact your mental health. So think about that. Another more subtle ways that passive aggression can kind of come out. If you think about sarcasm, sarcasm, a lack of response. Procrastination is another way that passive aggression can come out. And I'm going to say something again, say something that might be a bit controversial, okay? But I also think that being late is also a form of passive aggression, okay? Lateness is also a form of passive aggression. And maybe that you're in a situation where you don't really want to be. Maybe you're in a relationship with your workplace, or a person, or whatever, that you don't really want to be. So instead of actually you saying, actually, this is not working for me, you sabotage it by you end up being late. And so you're late for projects, you're late for phone calls, you're late for meetups, you meet up for everything. The boundaries are just out the window. So if you find yourself that you're always being late for something, and this is not to shade anyone or shame anyone who's compulsively late. This is really about having an honest conversation with yourself about that. What is that really about? What is it about that chaos, that is continually sabotaging your ability to grow? And if there's something about the space that if there's something about the environment that you're always late, the relationship with lateness is with a person or an institution or whatever, then you need to look at that. Because if you're constantly late, then there's something in that relationship that you're avoiding. There's something in that relationship that doesn't work for you. Or there's something about that experience that feels unsafe, which is why you're habitually late. So think about that. Think about that, and be willing to have a really honest conversation with yourself about actually what is going on for me around this. Why is it that I find it so difficult to do this? What's the pain? What is causing me pain around doing this? What am I trying to avoid in engaging with this particular thing or this person? What is it that I'm trying to avoid? What is it about this situation that makes me feel unsafe? What am I not being truthful to myself about? Because sometimes when we find it hard, if we find it difficult to tell the truth to ourselves, then it creates like a codependent pattern. It creates a codependent pattern where you feel like you have to do this, or you have to say that, or you have to show up a certain type of way, and that just breeds anger and resentment. It creates anger and resentment because you can never really be your true self. You can never really be your true self, and that is going to be true for a lot of us as black women, because the system doesn't want us to have a voice. The system doesn't want us to be visible. The system doesn't want us to progress. The system doesn't want us to grow. It doesn't want us to be fabulous. It doesn't want us to be great. It doesn't want us to be powerful, amazing women. It wants us to be mules, and the system says we're just supposed to shut the hell up and get on with it. So if we're in a situation that is resisting against all of those things, okay, it's gonna make us. It's gonna we're gonna get pushback. We're gonna get pushback, and if over time, if we're not resisting the way that the system wants us to treat us ourselves, we're gonna get angry and we're gonna get resentful over time. So it is important for us to really look at our passive aggression, what that's about, because there's actually, again, there's gold in there. There's nuggets inside that behavior. There's nuggets inside how your relationship with your anger, because again, like I was saying before, your anger that is so complex when it comes to us. It's so complex when it comes to us as black women. But when you start to have those conversations with yourself, when you start to be honest about what's going on for you, when you start to question and be curious and explore what is happening for you in terms of your anger, then that's the only way you're going to be able to move forward. But I think because so many of us, again, like I was saying on the other live stream, we're so we feel so much shame and guilt around, or we're worried about being labeled the angry black woman, that we focus on that rather than the reasons why we're angry, and then we end up just getting stuck in the anger. The anger never really has, the anger doesn't have a voice, and then we end up harming ourselves because of it, because the anger doesn't have anywhere to process. Anger is energy. Okay, remember that your anger is energy as well. In your body, it's going to show up as energy. So that energy needs to go somewhere. So if you think about it within the context of that it being energy, think about how your relationship to it. If you ignore it or suppress it, over time it's going to become like a pressure cooker. And that's one of the reasons why so many of us fear our own anger. We find it difficult to connect to it, because we're absolutely terrified of the energy. It feels so intense. The charge behind it is so intense, that it's very, very difficult. I'm doing a training I'm doing some trauma training at the moment with Reshma, from the black guy that wrote My Grandmother's Hands, and he always talks about the charge. Okay, the charge of racism, the charge that comes with doing the racial work, the racial trauma work, and how important it is to kind of to really think about how that charge shows up, whether it's how it shows up in the body, whether it's the body's really tense, or whether it shows up in how people speak, or how, all of the physical ways, the subtle ways that the anger shows up, because it's energy, and there's a 500-year charge around race. Okay. And in that charge is the anger, the resentment, the grief, all of that stuff that we've not really been allowed to look at or feel or process up until more recently, when there's so many more black therapists that are coming out that are doing this work, and people are really only starting to give themselves permission to feel it. But the reason why it feels so tense is because there's 500 years of it. There's 500 years of it that we're trying to process, that we're trying to think about, that we're trying to feel. So it's not just about, when we do this work, it's not just about what's happening in your lifetime. As a black person, as a black woman, you're going to feel the charge of those 500 years. And that's why it's important to do this work, to do the anger work in community, to do it with a therapist. You can't do this stuff on your own. You can't do this. You can't do this work on your own. It's a lot. It's too much to do it on your own. I always say to my clients that doing this work, you have to do. There's responsibility for you to take care of yourself individually. Okay, and this is why I teach a lot about doing the self-care and all the rest of it. But there's also the collective work. There's the individual work that you do when you're at home, on a daily basis. You go to the gym, you do your food, you do your meditation, you do all that kind of stuff. So you're really in touch with what's happening for you, and you take care of yourself when you're at home. And then there's the collective stuff that we do, the community stuff, the sisterhood conversations, the identification, the grieving together, the communal grief. All of that stuff is really, really important. And then there's also the stuff that you can do in therapy on a one-on-one, where what I do is I witness the client's pain, I witness the client's shame, and I witness it for them, so they can, maybe they don't want to talk in a group. No, not everybody's ready to do group therapy at once. Sometimes they want to do individual therapy because they want to talk about specific things without talking to other people. And sometimes the shame that we feel, the shame that's been put on us, the shame around being black, the fear and the shame and the mistrust sometimes about what it means to be in a group with other black people, that can stop people wanting to do group work. For years I worked with a therapist because I just didn't feel comfortable being in groups with other black people because of my own shame and because of my own fear and the own trauma that I carried, the trauma that I had from being in, that I experienced in my own family, meant I wasn't able to do group work. I wasn't able to sit in groups because I just felt so triggered. But it's only after doing the work in therapy, and I took my time and I gently started to feel my own and practice. I was able to practice discernment, and I was able to really take care of myself when it came to being around other black people and understanding my codependency and all of that sort of stuff. It's only when I started really doing that work that I started to feel more comfortable doing it. But it's an important part of the work. The community work is just as important as doing the individual work, but it's about timing and understanding what you need and what season you're at. What season you're at. So if some people can just dive in and do the group work, some people can't. And it's okay, and it's not right or wrong, but it's understanding that also at some point, there needs to be a crossover to do the community work as well, because racism and understanding systems of oppression happen to us as a collective. Yeah, it happens to us as a collective. So an important part of the healing process is doing the healing work as a collective. Yeah, you can do so much in therapy, but it's a different type of education. It's a different type of psychoeducation, different type of learning when you're in a group. One of the things that that comes up quite a lot in the mastermind that I'm in, the wellness mastermind that I do, is that they begin to, I throw the elephant. I talk about the elephant in the room, about the fact that black women will often say, I don't trust other black women don't like me, all this sort of stuff. I'll always bring that conversation in, because that is part of the community healing. We need to have those types of conversations. Why is it that black women feel that way about each other? Why is there so much mistrust within the community? And the reason for that is because that's how we were taught. The system, it is, the way that the system operates is a divide and conquer situation. On top of that is that many of us were raised in homes that were unsafe. Many of us were raised in homes that were violent. There was family violence. And so, with that going on, of course, it's going to be triggering for people to then come into an environment to do healing work with other black people that they don't know. So an important part of the piece of healing that I work with people in that sense is to open that conversation, so that we can start to really talk about that. Talk about the triggers. Talk about, well, a lot of time it's mother wound stuff as well. It's mother wound stuff that's been projected onto other black women in the group. Again, I talked about this on Wednesday about the displacement. The mistrust and all of that kind of stuff that happens is often a displacement. It's displacement from unhealed mother wound stuff. So that's really important to understand. So just really think about that. Excuse me, think about that. So yeah, that was number four, talking about passive aggression. So the fifth one is resentment. Okay, the fifth one is resentment. So resentment. I was reading something the other day about somebody was talking about how resentment is not from necessarily from the anger family. It's also linked to envy, and I thought it was really interesting. So basically, resentment is actually it's a combination of rage and envy. Okay, resentment is a combination of rage and envy. So resentment is something where anger is kind of built up over time. Okay, resentment is about unmet needs. Okay, needs not being met, not having a voice, not being seen, not being witnessed, not feeling like you matter, all of that kind of stuff. So a lot of us as black people, as black women, we hold a lot of resentment because the system again doesn't want us to be seen or heard. A lot of us have got, in our families we weren't seen. A lot of women that I work with, they weren't seen and heard in their families, and so that creates a lot of resentment. There's abandonment rage in there. There's abandonment resentment. So even though you may have had families that you may have had parents that have put a roof over your head and fed you, but the nurturing and all of that didn't go beyond that because they didn't have anything else. So it's important to recognize that yes, your parents may have done the practical work, the practical work as in fed and clothed you, but it's also part of human nature to feel like you belong. It's part of human nature to feel an emotional connection. These are basic human needs. And quite often, I think sometimes, family members can guilt trip us about wanting an emotional connection with our family members, outside of all of the practical stuff. What they say, oh, what do you mean? Well, I put clothes on your back. Why are you complaining? Because it's a natural human need to actually want to connect. Attachment is really important, but because of the history, the traumatic history that we have under the system, and also quite often within families of origin, the anger and the resentment comes from not having those needs met. Okay, so important part of the work that I do with clients, whether it's group work or whether it's one to one, is compassion. It's compassion and empathy, because a lot of my clients, well, not all, I wouldn't say a lot of them, all of them, were not seen. Were not seen. They weren't acknowledged. They weren't acknowledged. They weren't visible. They didn't feel like they were allowed to be themselves. They don't feel like they were allowed to be their authentic selves because of the violence, because of the parents. They've got their own traumas and stuff going on. They've got their own issues around poverty, and again, they're victims themselves. But that doesn't mean to say that you don't have a right to feel the way that you feel. Both of those things can be true. That's something else that's important to say. Both of those things can be true. Your parents can not have the tools. Your parents can have their own trauma. Your parents can have their own stuff going on. Your parents can not have met your needs. Your parents can have been violent, abusive, all that kind of stuff. Okay? And you can also have a right to be upset, to be angry with your parents for not meeting those needs. Your parents can be victims. You just like your parents can be victims and abusers. You can also be. You also have the right to express your pain and to be upset about what they did or didn't do. Those things are that's also just as important, and it's important to say that, because people can gaslight you into not feeling like you have the right to feel the way that you do towards your family and your parents, because they did the practical part of it. A lot of my parents' generation, their love language was acts of service. They would go to work, they do all that kind of stuff. But they, again, the emotional part of it, they're being told that you're loved, and being emotionally nurtured, being physically getting hugs and all the rest of it, all that kind of stuff. That a lot of that stuff was lacking. A lot of that stuff was lacking in our homes as children and growing up, and even as adults. Because we've, as a community, we've been exposed, we've experienced so much violence, under the system, that there's just no space for tenderness. A lot of times there's not been any space for tenderness. There's been no space for kindness, because there's been so much violence and aggression that's been put onto us. So we end up ingesting it and then acting it out on our own. And this is why doing this work is so important. This is why doing this work is so important, and understanding your anger is so important, because then you use your anger, you use your stuff for good. And this is the last one, this the sixth and final one that I'm going to be sharing with you today, is assertive anger. Okay, assertive anger is the anger that you're going to get shit done. And as a therapist, and me choosing to do this work specifically with my community, particularly with black women, that's where my assertive anger has 100% played a role. Instead of focusing on blaming the white man. And obviously we know that the system is toxic. We know that there's a history of nonsense that's gone on and all the rest of it. We know all of that. We understand all of that. But I didn't want to get stuck in that. I didn't want to get stuck in the blame. I didn't want to get stuck in that, because that's how you hand over your power. When you're always focusing on them, you hand over your power. I focused on what I can control and what I can do. And what I do, even me doing this live stream is a form of assertive anger. Yeah? Because what I'm doing is I'm using my own anger about black women being gaslit by being called the angry black woman, to actually do a live stream, to do a 2-part live stream on how to understand your anger. I'm trying to empower you to think about your anger in a very different way. I'm trying to empower you to think about your relationship with anger, so that you can change it and make different choices when you feel anger. I'm on here using my assertive anger to help you to understand the different types of anger, how your anger shows up, how you act out your anger, how you act in your anger, how you're displacing your anger onto other people, how you're harming yourself with your own anger. Okay, when I'm sharing you all of this stuff as a therapist, I'm empowering you to make different choices. Yeah, so that's how I'm using my anger to be assertive. Because when I think about how black women are treated, I feel angry about it. I feel angry about it. But I'm not going to internalize it and make it about me. I'm not gonna blame the system. I can put the responsibility where it needs to go and understand that it's systemic. But I am not going to allow myself to get stuck in pointing the finger at what's going on over there, because I'm thinking, what can I do in this moment to change it? What can I do in this moment to empower my sisters, yeah, to make different changes and help them understand a different way of looking at anger? So think about it. Think about what you can do in your life around your anger to make positive change. How can you change your relationship with anger, so that it's not some negative thing that you're trying to avoid because you don't want to be labeled the angry black woman? How can you use your anger to channel it into something that is powerful? How can you do that? How can you do that in your workplace? How can you do that as a parent? How can you do that in your community? What action can you take that is really going to nurture who you are as a person? How can you use that anger for change in your own personal life? Instead of using if you're self-harming and acting out and doing all of that compulsive stuff, how can you use that anger to channel it into something that is gonna empower you to do something that's so much better? Because a lot of energy as well goes into the negative stuff. A lot of energy. Like I said, anger is energy. And I think because the system is set up to destroy us, we end up internalizing that, and then the anger becomes, well, I'm going to destroy myself. Unconsciously, we are programmed to destroy ourselves, and that's why the self-harming and all of that kind of stuff, it happens. It happens because we've been programmed by the system to destroy ourselves, and we don't even, sometimes we don't even know it's happening. It shows up as in your compulsive behavior, in your compulsive eating, your compulsive spending. It's because we've been programmed to destroy ourselves. The system wants us to destroy ourselves. But once you recognize that, and once you understand that what you've internalized, then you have a responsibility to change that. How can I change my behavior from punishing myself, abusing others? How can I change that behavior to becoming a force for change? How can you do that? And you do that by starting to do the work on yourself, by paying attention to your anger, by having respect for anger. Respecting your anger means having a conversation with it. One of the things that I teach in my class as well is to think about anger in the think about anger in the third person, like it's a relationship. And I do this with the context of money. When we're talking about financial therapy, I do that in the context of money. But do the same thing with anger. If anger was a person, how would you explain? How would you explore that relationship? Okay, with the anger, how would you explain it? Do you respect it? Do you have a conversation with it? Are you in control of it? Not in a sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, just like, do you have discernment around your anger? Do you have discernment around your anger, or does your anger just wake up with a baseball bat and start flinging stuff all over the place? When that happens, it's because there's so much stuff under there that's repressed. It's probably stuff that's happened in your lifetime, and it's probably historical. It's probably historical. There's a phrase that we use in recovery, and they say that if you're hysterical about something, it's 9 times out of 10 it's historical. If you're hysterical, it's historical. Okay? If you're hysterical, it's historical. So think about that. Think about that. All right. So that's it for today. I'm going to leave it there. So those are the 6 types that I've shared. So it's retaliating, anger as a mask for emotions, anger where you internalize it and you self-harm. Okay? Passive aggression, resentment, and assertive anger. Okay? If you've got any questions at all about anything that I've shared today, which ones you relate to or whatever, you can drop a note in the comments, or you can send me a DM. You can email me info@guideofgreatness.com. If you would like to work with me, if you know that you've got anger issues, or you've got stuff going on around other family members that are angry, this is another part of the whole thing. That's difficult. It's not just about your own relationship with anger, but it's actually dealing with other people's anger. Maybe I'll do a part 3 actually on how I'm dealing with other people's anger, how to set boundaries around other people that are angry. Because as black people, as black women, we're actually on the other end of other people's rage, other people's displacement. So maybe I'll do that as a third one. Actually, do part 3 around how to deal with other people's anger. But yeah, so if you're struggling with any of those things and you need support, you can click the link in the bio, go to heal.juneallen.net. That's heal.juneallen.net. That's heal.juneallen.net. You're so welcome, Rose. So I hope you found this useful. Again, hit me up if you want some support with any of this, and I will see you next time. All right, take care. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.